You're listening to the Fantasy Wildcard Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Wildcard Dynasty show. I'll be your host this week, Ali. You can follow me on X at FF Dynasty Grill. With me as always is my amazing co-host Mags, who you can follow on X at Hot Seat Mags. How are you doing this evening, Mags?
Yeah, I'm doing good, mate. I'm burning the candle at both ends. I'm literally just back from work. We had a nice little, after school event. So I'm jumping right in to talk some Dynasty. So if I start talking about, maths and times tables and spelling, just cut me off. I'm on a roll with that.
Love to hear it. Yeah, and we're going to bring in our co-host here. It's funny to say our co-host because he is now a part of the team. So the brand new co-host of the Fantasy Wildcard Rewind show. We give a warm wildcard return to Lewis Wood, who you can follow on X at LewisWoodFF_UK. Lewis, how you doing, my friend?
Yeah, really good. Thank you, mate. Really excited to be joining. I did the same show last year. It's always really exciting to be talking through this topic. And been really enjoying being part of the Wildcard Network as well with the Rewind show.
Excellent. No, I loved the show last year. We had to get you back on. Had some great shouts last year, so can't wait to see who you've picked tonight. And yeah, we love having you. Welcome you to the team. Great member that you are, and you're ready producing some good shows with the wildcard team. So can't wait. Let's crack on with the show. But yeah, I mean, as we're talking right now, I'm sure there's going to be some interesting cuts going on right now today. I'm sure Jonathan Taylor is about to get traded, which is going to be interesting. So when you're listening to this, he's probably on a different team, or perhaps not. Who knows?
I think it's like they've got 47 minutes to take him off the pup or whatever the injured list is, to mean that if he gets traded, he can then be activated immediately. So there should hopefully be something coming through. I don't know if either of you got Twitter on in the background. There should hopefully be something coming through while we're on at the minute.
Oh yes, constantly refreshing. I have been for the past sort of 10 minutes before the show, hoping that something would go through. But yeah, I think they've got until 4 p.m. Otherwise, I think he misses the first 4 games regardless of his status. So yeah, really interesting day, cut down day, and we always seem to do it on this day. So we'll keep a track of that. But yeah, for the topic for tonight is we'll be talking camp and preseason hype. So players that have made an impression. And then more importantly, what it all means for Dynasty in terms of their value and the strategy going forward. So, Lewis, who is the first person that stood out to you in preseason or in training camp?
Yeah, I've tried to go for a mix of players here in terms of like some who are more established, some rookies, because obviously it's quite easy to just go, the big name rookies have been really exciting. But I wanted to focus on kind of some slightly lower rated players, or some people who might not currently be on people's rosters, or they might be on a lot of taxi squads, that kind of thing. And starting off with a quarterback who actually was my QB5 going into the NFL draft earlier this year, and he went in the 5th round to the Browns, which wasn't a particularly good spot, but it's Dorian Thompson-Robinson. He has actually looks quite exciting and quite electric every time he's hit the field in preseason. There's been a fair amount of hype around him. Now, obviously, the situation for him is difficult because they have so much money invested in Deshaun Watson. It's unlikely that he's ever going to leave the team, and so a fully guaranteed deal. But with Watson's play last year, like there's every world in which he could just not be good enough anymore, having taken 2 years off for reasons that we will choose not to speak about. And DTR, he looked pretty electric in college. Like I really liked him coming out, and especially a more mobile QB. I think to me, he looked like one of the best rookie QBs. There's obviously it just raises the floor when you can run the ball like he can as well. But he actually looked pretty competent running the offense as well. He's someone that I quite wanted the Rams to take. Obviously, we ended up with the gunslinger Stetson Bennett instead. But yeah, DTR was my first shout for someone whose stock has definitely been raised, and is probably out there available. Probably not anymore, but it's probably on taxi squads out there at the minute as someone who maybe could be a backup you could stash with some upside.
Yeah, he's a guy that I kind of see him as you, Lewis. I was watching some of his college tape, and I was like, this guy looks really good. And I kind of asked people on the Dynasty hot seat, like in pre-season, like pre-drafts, like, what do you think about Dorian Thompson-Robinson? A lot of people were like, he would never really come up in conversation with these other quarterbacks. And for me, I was almost convinced that the Arizona Cardinals, that's the team that need to take Dorian Thompson-Robinson with Kyler Murray out. You think he would slot in really, really well there. But unfortunately, he has gone to the Browns, and we kind of mentioned Deshaun Watson. What's going to happen there? I do have a feeling that even if Deshaun Watson comes out and doesn't play great, they're paying him so much money that they almost can't drop him. So I think it's a bit of a shame for DTR, but he's a good player, which is what you want on your teams, right? You want good players on your teams. He might even be on waivers at this stage, right? Maybe someone's picked him up. Maybe worth stashing away in your taxi squad. He's someone that people might like the look of and might even trade, to get him years down the line. So I think he's someone worth stashing for sure.
Yeah, I mean, who's to say in a year's time, give him another preseason where he lights it up like he has this preseason? Who's to say a team, because we know currently there's plenty of teams, including my team, the Buccaneers, your team, the Rams, Lewis, that next season could be looking for a quarterback. Who's to say one of these teams won't trade for DTR next season or the year after and give the Browns more than what they paid for him and so forth? They'd be happy with the deal. I mean, if you look at stat wise, he was officially the best rookie quarterback in preseason, although he clearly played against a lot of the team's backups and probably played more than what the starting rookie quarterbacks did. But in terms of his stats, 64% completion percentage. I mean, looked like a veteran out there, passing for 440 yards, 69 rushing yards on the ground, which was nice. 2 passing touchdowns, no interceptions, which is crucial for a rookie. Clearly just hit the ground running, and a passer rating of over 100, 105.5. I mean, you really couldn't ask much more of DTR. But yeah, we go back to that point. He's behind Deshaun Watson, who they've given the guaranteed contract to. I do think Watson is going to take a step forward this year, but I can't see him straight away returning to his elite level where he was finishing quarterback 5. What was it, for 3 years in a row, something like that? I can't see him being there. I can see him being sort of a low quarterback 1, sort of in the 10 to 12 range. But that's going to be enough for the Browns, I think, who have got a good roster from top to bottom. I think they will be pushing into the playoffs. And therefore, I think Deshaun Watson is going to be the guy for the next few years, locked in. He's still young. The only way I can see it really is if he fancies a few more massages and really messes up his NFL career. But for me at the minute, DTR really is just an upside backup quarterback. But yeah, who knows? If you can stash him away, I know a lot of the leagues that I play in, we have quite deep benches. We've got 4 or 5 taxi spots, so I'm happy to stash him away right now and keep him there for at least a year and just see what happens, because who knows in a year's time, there's some rookie quarterbacks coming in. There's some old quarterbacks that could be going out of the league. Who knows if there's a team that's willing to at least trade for him and give him a better situation than he's in right now. So yeah, we'll move on to the second guy you want to talk about. And this is also a quarterback. And it's an interesting one because he's just changed teams.
Yeah, well, thinking about kind of, you were saying someone might trade for him. And normally when you trade for a quarterback, it's someone that has actually looked good when they've played. And this is the thing I want to preference, that like, just because I've chosen these players doesn't mean they're all players I believe in. It's just really interesting players to talk about. So Josh Dobbs obviously was traded to the Cardinals from the Browns for, I think it was a 5th round pick, which I think was genuinely ludicrous. The Cardinals, obviously, pretty likely they're the odds-on favourite for to be the worst team in football this year, and I think that's pretty likely. I'm not convinced Kyler Murray's going to play at all next year because I just think what's the point really? We think he's probably, with his injury, going to be ruled out, and somewhere until week 6 to 8, somewhere until the mid-season point. But if they're 0-8 at that point, why bother trying him out? So, it looks likely with the cut of Colt McCoy that Josh Dobbs is going to be the starting quarterback. It's either him or Clayton Tune, who is a rookie that I've not been particularly into. I don't think he's shown a huge amount. You think if you're going to trade, a fifth, and let's be honest, at the latest, the 502, 503, like that's really the highest upside for the Cards this year. You'd think if you're going to trade that pick for a quarterback, they're going to be the starter. And in Superflex leagues, any starting quarterback might be worth something. Hannah and I actually spoke about this yesterday on the Wildcard Rewind show. We were talking about people don't really realize that you can start a non-quarterback in the Superflex spot. And if you are, and I'll repeat what I said yesterday. If you are in a space where in week 1, you find yourself starting Josh Dobbs in your Superflex spot, find a different hobby, do something else. You're not, this isn't going to be fun for you. Whether you do it for fun or whether you do it for money, you're not going to manage either. So just go do something else. Like when he started for the Titans, he didn't look great. He's a veteran in the league, but like not in a good way. Like the bloke's 28 and he started something like 8 games, I believe.
It is exactly 8 games, yes.
Yeah. I'm not sure there's anything there. And I think like his absolute upside is QB 25? I don't see it, but he's an interesting player to talk about.
Yeah, it is interesting because he's obviously making the headlines, and I really never saw this coming. Josh Dobbs being a starting quarterback this season, I think is absolutely insane. Presumably, he will be the starting quarterback, trading a 5th round pick for him, which is odd for a team that's clearly rebuilding. You kind of think that you want to gather as many picks as you can get rather than trade them away for random backup quarterbacks that is never going to be a franchise quarterback.
Yep.
I just feel a bit sorry for poor Colt McCoy because he's really not done too much wrong. He's an okay backup quarterback that's done a job when he came in. I think his record is 50-50 wins and losses in terms of his career in Arizona for a team that's not great is actually pretty good. And then what was also odd was head coach Jonathan Gannon coming out saying he's not actually going to name a starting quarterback until just before week 1 because it will give up an advantage. Well, I'm really not quite sure what advantage they're looking to gain with Josh Dobbs or Clayton Tune. I mean, why not just give Clayton Tune, a guy that you've just drafted, just see what you've got in him? All right, you might have seen him in preseason, but that's not real life NFL 100-mile-an-hour full speed. So it's a really odd decision for me. Either way, I do agree. I think they are going to tank almost this year. They're trading away some of their best players as well. So if I have seen him picked up on waivers, I actually saw someone give $20 in a $20 fab for Josh Dobbs, and you only have 100 to start off with. So 20% of your budget on Josh Dobbs was an interesting one. If you have got him, if you did pick him up for pennies, I'll just sell for anything that you can get for him, even if it's a 4th or 5th round pick. You certainly need to do it. If you're thinking about holding him, hoping that he does start the first few games, you need to trade him away before any news of Kyler Murray coming back into the lineup, because Dobbs will be worth 0.
Yeah, absolutely. That was my big note on that as well, Ollie, was if you get a chance to sell him, you need to sell. Literally, I'd take that 25, actually, if he was on my team. I'd be like, give me that 25. I'll take that. And I mean, I don't have too much to say apart from, I mean, Trey Lance feels shit enough already. Now that he went for a 4th round pick and Josh Dobbs goes for a 5th, that guy's confidence has got to be rock bottom after seeing that. And also interestingly, I found out about Josh Dobbs. He was once traded for a 5th round pick before, whenever he went from the Steelers to Jacksonville. Jacksonville spent a 5th round pick on him. He never played a game. And then they released him and he went back to the Steelers. So there's a fun story about Josh Dobbs. So yeah.
He must be a good locker guy. I know there's a lot of backup quarterbacks that have won so many jobs and kept their jobs throughout the years. Must have been a good guy to be around the team. Perhaps Dobbs is one of them, but yeah, what a guy. Sell for what you can. We'll move on to the running back position now, and a guy that has seen some pretty awesome news. Well, positive news, should I say, in the preseason. And a bit of surprise to me, but a welcome one.
Yeah, Kenneth Gainwell for the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles obviously lost Miles Sanders. They're not actually, and this is an exciting one, but I'll start it with a little bit dour news. That they're not actually the rushing powerhouse that we think they are, just because they have a fantastic O-line. But obviously, Jalen Hurts takes a few of the carries and almost all of the goal line work because he is the strongest quarterback in the league. And they are quite a pass-heavy offense, which you would be if you had the weapons that they have. But that said, there's an exciting fantasy role here with the loss of Miles Sanders. They have gone out and got themselves two shiny new running backs, Rashard Penny, who they obviously picked up as a free agent, and DeAndre Swift, who they traded for after the Lions took Jahmyr Gibbs. Kenneth Gainwell was already on the roster. He was taken on day 3 a couple of years ago, although he was quite highly talented beforehand, mostly as a pass-catching back. In camp this offseason, Kenneth Gainwell has by far the most touches among running backs. He has the most carries with the first team offense. The last time that we could see after the end of preseason, he had 21 with the first team offense. The closest was then Swift with 11. And he also had 11 catches. Like, he was really involved in preseason. And the crucial thing for me here, let's be honest, I think DeAndre Swift and Rashard Penny are more talented than Kenneth Gainwell. Both have had significant injury history. Rashard Penny, I think Rashard Penny is like a top 10 most talented back in the league. He just cannot keep it together. They seem to really like Kenneth Gainwell. Like, they've kept him around. He's made the roster. He was never in doubt to make the roster. First of all, Swift and Penny both have injury histories, but also it might just be that they like Kenny Gainwell anyway. And of the three of them, the current Fantasy Pros ADP, DeAndre Swift is going as the RB31, Rashard Penny is going as the RB39, Kenneth Gainwell is going as the RB52. Like, this is a place where you just take the cheapest option and see what happens. I think there's a real chance that Kenneth Gainwell could be a sleeper this year.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's the best point you could have made about him as well, is he's the cheapest of this three-headed. I wrote in the notes dragon, but I think you're right. It's not really like a drag. It's more like, something that's kind of dangerous when it needs to be, but not maybe like a skunk, right? That's sort of like
a three-headed skunk,
right? It's dangerous. Like, you wouldn't want to bump into one, but you're not really too worried about it if you really think about it. But
yeah, I could punt one out a window. It would be fine. Like.
Yeah, right. So he's the cheapest of the three. He's effective in the passing game, and he's not made of jelly like the rest of his teammates. So there will be a point in time, I would guess, where DeAndre Swift and Rashard Penny are both injured, because they're always injured all the time. So that'll be the point when Kenny Gainwell really, starts to come into his own. He averages 5 yards per touch on that team, which is about the same as the other two have done across their career. And these are guys that are touted as these high-end, running backs, first-round pick in Rashard Penny, a guy that you would have to, just last year give multiple first-round picks to get in DeAndre Swift. Kenny Gainwell holds his own whenever you look at the stats as well. So I think he's a great person to pick up on the cheap now while it lasts. Because if he comes out week 1 and he, is splitting carries even with them, his price is going to, double probably, right? So now is the time to go get him before people, realize. I completely agree.
Yeah, I agree. I think there was a couple of windows. One was before the preseason where people thought that Swift and Penny was going to be the 1-2. And then we saw from game 1 that they rested the starters, which included Kenny Gainwell, while Swift and Penny was grinding out the yards in week 1. I guess they just know what they're going to get in Kenny Gainwell. It was really interesting to see his usage in camp and preseason. Getting more carries with the ones was interesting. I guess just they need someone that's going to be a steady, stable running back. And I guess that's what they had in Miles Sanders last year. He wasn't spectacular, but he done enough, and he scored plenty of touchdowns. He got a lot of the work because he was okay. And I guess Kenny Gainwell is not as talented as Miles Sanders, but he's not far off. He doesn't do much wrong. And I guess that came to a head in the postseason, where he was used a lot in the postseason. They trusted him in that role to the Super Bowl. So it was probably telling back then that they really like Kenny Gainwell.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a bit of a shame because I've been a massive Rashad Penny fan. I've got so many shares bought in cheap because a lot of people weren't talking about him. They talk about DeAndre Swift because we know how talented he is. But yeah, it's going to be a three-headed. It's definitely not going to be a monster, but it's going to be fine. It's going to look good on the stat sheet because of how good Jalen Hurts is as a runner. But yeah, in terms of, can I see either one of these running backs becoming a running back one or having top 6 or 7 running backs in terms of value and production this year? I can't. No, I think it's going to be a combination of all three. And Kenny Gainwell's definitely going to be used in then third down situations when the game is on the line. They trust Kenny Gainwell. So yeah, interesting in Kenny Gainwell again, because a lot of people are saying DeAndre Swift looks really good. He's going to be the starter. His value's gone up. Kenny Gainwell's value's gone down. So it's probably a good time to invest back in Kenny Gainwell right now.
Yeah, for sure.
So we'll move on to the second running back that you want to talk about, Lewis. And yeah, this is a guy that is creating a lot of buzz. Hopefully he's going to get used in the right way in 2023.
Yeah, so I just want to list off a couple of stats about this running back last year before we introduce who it is. This running back forced 29 missed tackles, which was the 8th highest elusive rating for PFF. He also had the same yards after contact per attempt as Jonathan Taylor and Travis Etienne. So 2 pretty good backs, 2 pretty elusive backs as well, especially Travis Etienne. Each year in fantasy, we really like taking backup running backs, knowing that they have huge upside if the lead back is to go down. For the past few years, we've been talking about Alex Mattison like that. We've been talking about Tony Pollard like that. Now, the interesting parallel there is they've both ended up as pretty valuable starters. And this isn't me saying that this is what's going to happen with this guy. But Jaylen Warren for the Pittsburgh Steelers, running behind Najee Harris, has looked absolutely explosive in preseason, but also looked explosive last year when Najee was hurt, like when he got onto the field. He seems like he's absolutely worth, taking a shot on. And he's RB 45 at the moment in ADP, so he's someone absolutely worth taking a punt on. But he looks, not to really overhype it, but he looks better than Najee when they're both on the field. I'm quite like Najee Harris this year just because of the workload. But I think we could see Jaylen Warren start coming into play and start taking some of the snaps off Najee Harris, which is obviously quite exciting. And, with his efficiency, could end up that he ends up as like a flex level play. But I don't think there are many backs, or there are many handcuffs with the same upside that he has. Like, I think there's a real opportunity for him. If anything were to happen to Najee Harris, which it has previously, I think there's a real opportunity for him to be an absolute stud this year.
Yeah, completely agree. I think the Dynasty and fantasy managers are getting smart because we've seen Jaylen Warren's value has slowly increased throughout preseason, throughout the offseason. And I just think everybody's smart to it now, where we could see an explosion of Jaylen Warren in 2023 if the offense allows for it. Unfortunately, they are a very stubborn bunch, and they keep insisting on Najee Harris is going to be the workhorse back. But I guess we're going to see. Jaylen Warren looked absolutely great in preseason. He ran off that 60-plus yard touchdown run a couple of weeks ago. I loved looking at Najee Harris's longest run in his career. I think it's something like, it's in the 30 yards. I think it's 33 yards or 34 yards is his longest run of his career so far. So it just shows that Najee Harris is purely there on volume and volume alone. And yeah, he may well get it again this year, but Jaylen Warren is ready to take his seat. And it's a bit to me like, almost like the Tony Pollard and Zeke situation from last year. And I'm not saying that Najee Harris is washed like Ezekiel Elliott is. It's different part of his career. But a lot of people, including myself, was crying out for Tony Pollard to get a bigger role in the offense last year. And slowly through injuries and just because of how good Tony Pollard was in the situations that he was in, they just couldn't keep him off the field. And Tony Pollard finally took over. And as you mentioned, Lewis, just look how valuable Tony Pollard is right now in Dynasty. He's ranked as a top 7 or 8 Dynasty running back. So yeah, I just think Jaylen Warren owners have to bide their time right now. But I think eventually the Pittsburgh Steelers aren't going to be able to keep Jaylen Warren off the field. So he is going to slowly work into the offense a bit more. And yeah, I just think to start off with, we might be frustrated, and I think you might get a buy window for Jaylen Warren. But yeah, I think eventually he's going to have to take over, and he's going to be a guy that you can probably end up flexing in some positions later on in the season.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the stats with Jaylen Warren, and you can it's right there. He's more efficient rushing the ball than Najee Harris is, and he's more efficient in the passing game as well. In fact, there is I can't quite remember which website I've seen this on, but they did like a fantasy points per 100 snaps, and it's about the same actually. So Warren and Najee Harris are per like snap that they get are scoring the same amount of fantasy points. It's just so happened that Najee is getting a huge bump in the amount of snaps that he's getting compared to someone like Jaylen Warren. Something people forget about Najee Harris, even though he's only had a couple of years in the league, this guy's got a lot of miles on him. Since 2019, he's had above or around 300 touches a year going back to his time in college where he was used as a workhorse. Those bumps still matter. They still matter. I know they're not NFL level, but, he's getting hit 300 times a year every year since 2019. He's injured his right ankle or his right foot in 2018, 2019, 2021, 2022, sometimes several times in the same year. It feels like the wheels are about to come off Najee Harris, and I think people maybe don't see it because he's only been in the league for a few years, but he is still older. I mean, you mentioned Alexander Mattison there, Lewis. Najee Harris is older than Alexander Mattison. People kind of forget that he is this older prospect coming out. So I can see him starting to dwindle a bit earlier than, you might traditionally see running backs dwindle in the league. But the only issue I have with Jaylen Warren, and it's not really an issue with how he plays or anything, but you can't talk about Jaylen Warren without, speaking about how bad Najee Harris is. And I'm like, if Jaylen Warren is really that good, people will be talking about how amazing Jaylen Warren is and not how bad Najee Harris is. So I think he still needs to show a little bit extra. So hopefully he gets a chance to do it this season because I think he deserves it.
Yeah, completely agree. I think it's a situation to monitor for sure. I think the Steelers actually are going to be a much better offense than a lot of people are expecting this year. So excited to see that. We're going to go to an offense that might not be quite as exciting to watch, especially if Jonathan Taylor is traded away. So over to you, Lewis.
Well, it's an offense which is exciting to watch from the quarterback position, but with no Jonathan Taylor, although, we've got 21 minutes left for him to go on PUP, so we'll see what happens. I wanted to touch on Deon Jackson, and I suppose you can consider Evan Hull as part of this as well, because what I want to talk about isn't Deon Jackson specifically, but what I want to talk about is kind of the way in which the running back position works, in that if someone is the starter, you can play them for fantasy and it will be fine. We were obviously just talking before we got started, Ali, about at the wide receiver position, you actually have to be incredibly talented to make it work. Volume doesn't really work. It's why you can't handcuff a wide receiver. But with running back, you really can. If Jonathan Taylor gets traded and they don't go and pick up one of the free agent running backs that's out there at the minute, either one of them were elite ones or elite in 2018 with Kareem Hunt and Leonard Fournette, and or if they go and pick up one of the more exciting rookies, then Deon Jackson's the starter, I think, and he played all right. He was actually usable for fantasy when JT was out, so there's definitely something there. If JT ends up being traded, which I don't think is going to happen, I think he's probably going to end up still on the Colts, but there's the opportunity there. It's someone who you need to be stashing, him and Evan Hull as well. And it doesn't actually matter Whether he's any good or not, as a side note, I don't think he is. I think he's just a replacement level back. But if he's the starter, if he's named as a starting running back, even if it's just for a few weeks while JT's still injured, he's going to have some value. You can probably whack him into your lineup for a few weeks.
Yeah, I think he's someone that I think had one massive game last year, like where he got like 10 receptions or something. The thing that puts me off Deon Jackson in particular is his bread and butter is in the receiving game, and Anthony Richardson is the quarterback. And in my head, if I'm Anthony Richardson, am I going to dump it off to Deon Jackson, or am I going to run through this defender in front of me? Am I going to try and run around? I just don't see Anthony Richardson choosing that dump off option. So
yeah,
that's kind of why I'm like with him. If that is taken away, that receiving upside is taken away, I don't really see him as a rusher. My favorite stat I seen of his last year was he had one game where he carried the ball 3 times for -4 yards, which is a brilliant stat from last season. So, and I just think that they're going to have to bring in Kareem. They had all but signed Kareem Hunt, and he wasn't. It was very weird what's going on, but I can see them bringing in Hunt or Fournette to back up Jonathan Taylor, who will probably stay. Although he could have gone by now. I'm not checking Twitter. He might actually be away.
I've got the search on Twitter for Jonathan Taylor open on another screen.
Yeah.
And I'm just refreshing it for any news in case anything comes through.
So is Deon Jackson. He's just mentioning, like, come on.
I also think Kareem Hunt is probably monitoring the situation and is probably thinking, get my agent on the phone right now, get me to Indy if Jonathan Taylor or when he gets traded. But yeah, as you mentioned, Lewis, this isn't just about Deon Jackson. It's also about any sort of backup running back in the league that is actually going to be more beneficial to your roster than perhaps the wide receiver 3 or 4 on a team, perhaps that doesn't pass very much. You may think, well, this guy's incredibly talented, but at the end of the day, he's not going to give you them highs. Where you look at Deon Jackson last week, it might only be for 1 week, but in week 6, he was the overall running back 1. As you mentioned, Max, he did have that 10-catch game, 79 yards, a rushing touchdown. I think he only averaged about 3.7 yards per carry. So again, he wasn't great, but he had the volume for that week. And that is far more important than 2 catches for 21 yards as your wide receiver in your flex spot. So yeah, these people do have uses on your team. You need to be monitoring these situations. You need to be drafting these players late, because it only takes one thing to happen, a trade or an injury, and they get cast into these roles where they can help win you a week. So yeah, you need to stash these players. And then again, you can flip him as well. If he goes off again if he's the running back 1 and he has a fairly good game to start off with, you can cash in on him because he's not going to do it all season, that's for sure. So yeah, really interesting player to talk about.
Can I just make a quick point, actually, because this is something that I see quite a lot. If you have a player like Deon Jackson or some of these guys, you see as soon as they get any kind of fantasy relevance, anyone who has them are just like, I need a second. You're never going to get it.
No.
Just take a third and be happy. Like, because they're going to be worth nothing the week after. So just take what you can while you can.
Who was the Ravens running back that was really highly touted last year before they signed Devonta Freeman and Latavius Murray? There was a Ravens running back that was getting all the hype in preseason. I can't remember what his name was.
Yeah, has he moved to the Broncos now? Is he on the Broncos now?
I genuinely think he might be like out of the league right now.
Tyler Beatty was there. Justice Hill. Yeah, there was a few that was on the roster.
Maybe it was even the year before. Who am I thinking?
A perfect example. I can't think. Tom Strachan's probably screaming at the screen right now, so he knows exactly what it is, right?
It's been a sad day because
Tyson Williams. Williams.
Yeah.
That's who I'm thinking of.
XFL's finest.
Yeah, that's kind of what Deon Jackson is. Like, if he ends up as the starter, the reason I was bringing him up is because I managed to sell him for 2 seconds when he was named the starter, and then he played like 2 weeks, didn't do anything, and then they picked up Devonta Freeman. Like, that's what will happen to Deon Jackson if if Jonathan Taylor is moved in 2 minutes' time, they come out and name Deon Jackson as the starter. I promise you, by like week 2, they're picking on Kareem Hunt mobile, trying to desperately get him in. Like, he's not going to last.
Yeah.
Completely agree, and some great advice. So we'll move on to switch up and move on to the wide receiver position. So this is a really intriguing guy with probably incredibly high ceiling for this year.
Yeah, this is someone who is unlike the rest of the picks, which is kind of, if there's an injury, he could be really exciting. This is someone to stash. This is a rookie. Calvin Ridley obviously has basically not played for the last 2 years, and then was traded from the Falcons to the Jags while he was still suspended last year for gambling. And he's been a really tough one. Like, if you had Calvin Ridley, and I own him in a couple of leagues and have owned him for the last few years, you've kind of just had to hold him because you're not going to take scraps for him. I actually would have recommended going out and buying him last year if you can. And it's like we all forgot that Calvin Ridley's fantastic. I know there was a huge amount of risk of him coming back and not being sure what he was going to look like. But preseason, he's looked fantastic. We are getting so many reports out of training camp that he is looking absolutely dominant. I know there was that one clip of Zay Jones running a route and then him running the same route afterwards, and it just looks like he's running at twice the speed.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm really into the Trevor Lawrence breakout this year. I said yesterday on the Rewind show that I think he could be a wild card to have overall QB1 upside. I'm really into Calvin Ridley this year because of that as well. And because we know that he does have elite talent. And if he hasn't lost a step in the 2 years that he's missed, which it doesn't look like he has, that's a league winner. The only problem is people have tuned into that and his ADP is a little bit higher than I would want it to be at the minute.
Yeah, it certainly is. It's gone higher than I imagined it would be for a guy that hasn't played in the NFL for the best part of 2 years. But to be honest, the looks of his clips, and he just doesn't look like a guy that's had 2 years out. He looks like he's a guy that has always been in the league and has always been elite. I personally was doubting how good Calvin Ridley could be at the start of the summer. I was didn't really have many shares, so I couldn't sell him. But I really like Christian Kirk. I like the Christian Kirk where he was last year. I love the chemistry with Trevor Lawrence, but I just can't have Kirk over Calvin Ridley. Is the ADP though between the two is miles apart, which I think is interesting because I don't think they're going to be miles apart in terms of production this year. But Calvin Ridley, the last time we saw him was elite. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be Calvin Ridley gets all the targets, but I do think that Calvin Ridley is going to get the high value targets. So he's going to score plenty of touchdowns this year and really looks like he's got great chemistry with Trevor Lawrence. Just, the ADP of wide receiver 16 has crept up. I mean, there's certainly a way he can beat wide receiver 16. If he finishes the top 10 wide receiver, it wouldn't surprise me. But you may, if you're going running back early in drafts, you may have to take him as your wide receiver 1, which is a risk. I want him as my wide receiver 2. I feel really good about that because of the upside is there. But there certainly still is some risk involved with Ridley.
Yeah.
But a great guy. Just the ADP is perhaps, as you mentioned, a bit too high.
I think this is something that is surprisingly rare, and I don't think a lot of people realize how rare it is. This is a matchup of an elite wide receiver with an elite quarterback. And a lot of the times you get an elite quarterback that doesn't have an elite receiver or an elite receiver without an elite quarterback. This is like a match made in heaven because they're both, top tier talents. And we have to remember, you're right, it was such a long time ago, but the last time Ridley had a full season, he finished wide receiver 5, I think, overall, which is, absolutely amazing. And I think Trevor Lawrence is going to do a better job than I think he had Matt Ryan then. And Matt Ryan, obviously, a very, very good quarterback, but I think Trevor Lawrence, we can say, could easily have a better season than Matt Ryan did that year. And he's going to get better and better and better. He's a target hog, and we know Christian Kirk had a lot of targets last year. We know as well that there's Zay Jones and Ingram and ETN, but that could also be a good thing because you can't go out and double him every play because of those other people that are around. So I expect Calvin Ridley to really, really start eating and pretty soon. Last year, look at Christian Kirk, had an amazing year, was a wide receiver 1. He had 133 targets, had 84 receptions. I wouldn't be shocked if, Ridley ends up being those 1 in those 10 guys you see every year that actually ends up with 100 receptions. You could maybe even bet on it, right?
Do it. Spicy. Now, I was looking up the trade compensation because I wanted to refresh what they actually paid for him. So it was a 2023 fifth round pick and a 2024 conditional fourth that turns into a third if he reaches certain incentives in 2023. Can become a second.
Josh Dobbs and Trey Lance then.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is incredible value for someone that looks like he's, an elite wide receiver that isn't 30 years old yet. That, with an elite quarterback, that is really interesting. I think it just elevates Trevor Lawrence to perhaps an elite level this year and going forward in Dynasty.
Yeah, problem is you've missed the window on Calvin Ridley. Like if you wanted to buy him in Dynasty, you needed to do it last year.
Yeah. You needed to do what the Jaguars done and take him while he was suspended. And you're too late now. So we'll move on to a guy where I've got no interest in taking him, to be honest, but we're going to talk about him anyway because he is making headlines and he's making rosters. So we've got to talk about this guy.
Yeah, making rosters is a pun I do not feel good about at all. Justyn Ross, obviously electric when he was first in college in kind of his sophomore season, and really kind of broke out. He had a really impressive freshman season and kind of broke out in the college football playoffs in 2018. Then in 2019, it transpired that he has a rare neck condition called Klippel-Feil syndrome, which is when two of your neck vertebrae fuse together, which he has had surgery on a couple of times now. Because of that issue, he's actually the only NFL player ever to be playing with a congenital fusion in his spine, which, doesn't initially sound great, doesn't feel like something you should be playing football with. That then led to him going as a UDFA to the Chiefs. He missed the entirety of last year, actually, because of a foot injury. So unrelated to the neck issue. He's really been making waves in preseason, and also from kind of OTAs and training camp as well. For me, if this guy was on any other team, I don't think we'd be hearing anything about him. And Ali, we were talking about this before the show, that like our current need to try and figure out who's going to be Patrick Mahomes' wide receiver one is like an unhealthy addiction. And it was the same when Tyreek Hill was still there. Like, do you remember when we were like, maybe I can start Sammy Watkins this week, and actually Mecole Hardman could be an interesting player? And they weren't. Like, again, they'll go off for the occasional touchdown and we'll go, this is someone that's going to absolutely continue this. And they don't, and they never do. It was like when we were trying to search for Aaron Rodgers wide receiver 2 behind Devontae Adams. Like, you have to draft, like I was saying earlier, with running back is an opportunity position, wide receiver is a talent position, and I'm not convinced that Justyn Ross is the guy. You have to draft based off players who are talented enough that they will fight their way into contention. They have a lot of very mediocre wide receivers there. Like Justyn Ross is going to get his share, maybe like 20, 30 targets, and he'll, see some work, but there's so many wide receivers there who are on the same level as him. It's just because he's on the Chiefs, he's an unknown quality, and he was pretty good in college. Like he did look like he was going to be a first round pick a fair few years ago, but his freshman season was 2018. That's a long time. I'm really not into Justyn Ross. I see a lot of people who really, really are. Not for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like the Chiefs wide receiver one is a bit like the Loch Ness Monster, right? It's this kind of legend that, not everyone would love it to be real, but it's not there, let's be honest, right? It's not, you're not going to find it. It's Travis Kelce's hoovering up everything. And the problem with that as well is everybody thinks, oh, the Chiefs don't have an established wide receiver one, so we've got a real chance with Justyn Ross. But the issue is there's Travis Kelce, there's Jerick McKinnon, there's Sky Moore is there been looking great. There's MVS. There's Kadarius Toney. There's Rashee Rice. There's even Justin Watson gets involved. There's so many mouths to feed, and Kelsey's the only one with a knife and fork. So it doesn't really matter what's going to happen. He's probably not going to be around. But I tell you what he is good for, though. If you have him on your team right now, he is the absolute chef's kiss of a throw-in to get a deal done for you. Like, just be like, oh, I'll give you this. Oh, I'll give you Justyn Ross. And that piques intrigue so much. I managed to get James Conner for a late second because I threw in Justyn Ross. I was delighted with that because that's really going to help my team compete this year. Because I don't see Justyn Ross really doing much. Sure, he has looked good. He has looked nice, but you know, as a lot of people know, I am a Chiefs fan. He's not the one making the waves from the Chiefs' point of view, from all the Chiefs side, all the Chiefs news. That's Sky Moore. Sky Moore is getting most of the headlines for being the guy that looks like to be this mythical, you know, wide receiver one, not Justyn Ross. So if you have him, throw him in as a little trade piece, see what you can get for sure. But I don't see him having huge fantasy relevance.
Yeah, I'm certainly not going to disagree with you guys. I think the message is just don't go there. Don't get with the hype. Don't get carried away. Yeah, this guy's got talent, but as you mentioned, you've listed there, Mags, the number of players that are probably ahead of him right now. They're pretty much, a lot of them are on equals, and there's not going to be one guy that gets targeted more than 5 times in a game there, other than Travis Kelce. So there is not much upside. He's just made the final 53 on the roster. It's more of a good story than it is someone that you want to take much note of in Dynasty. He's a guy that I would love to sell because you know what's going to happen. He's going to catch a long touchdown pass or a flashy play in week 1 and everyone's going to go bonkers. Mm-hmm. And then he's probably not going to catch a pass for 2 weeks. That's the sort of guy that Justyn Ross is. So yeah, I think as a guy, if you have him, you've got to try and sell. Perhaps now because he's made the roster, people are thinking the talent is there. And he has a chance because there's not one clear wide receiver one. But yeah, just don't go there. Yeah. So we'll move on to our final guy tonight to talk about. And this is, we've got to go to the tight end position. So Lewis, who do you want to talk about?
Yeah, you've asked the wrong question because it's who do I want to talk about? I am a big believer in, and we were actually talking about this earlier today on Twitter, like when a tight end gains steam in the off season, sell them. Because it's very rare that actually translates to in season. Jake Ferguson is who I wanted to talk about. 2nd-year player for the Dallas Cowboys. They obviously went out and got Luke Schoonmaker in the 2nd round in the 23 NFL draft. They lost Dalton Schultz, so he is the presumed starter. And he has been targeted quite a lot in the preseason, and he's been running with the starters. Like, he absolutely is going to be the starting tight end. Whether that means a lot for fantasy, I'm not sure. But he's been getting a little bit of steam, so it's someone worth talking about. Tight end is actually reasonably similar to running back, where it, up until a point, opportunity is kind of the more important thing. And if he's going to be the starting tight end on what we think should continue to be a reasonably high-powered offense, Jake Ferguson could have kind of low tight end one upside. Also worth mentioning, low tight end one upside means nothing. If your tight end finishes past like the tight end 7, they might as well not exist. So yeah, he might have a decent amount of value, but I'm not convinced he's going to be someone that has a huge amount this year. I could be surprised. I quite liked him coming out of college, and he looked all right in limited snaps last year. So yeah, Jonathan Taylor is expected to remain on the pup list, so we'll miss at least 4 games. Probably means he's not being traded.
Interesting. Very interesting. But yeah, I mean, interesting as well. Jake Ferguson, for me, we saw snippets last year where he was actually on the field a surprising amount of times, even with Dalton Schultz, and flashed some plays. So yeah, the Cowboys, they like Jake Ferguson. I wrote about him today in my article, what we learned from preseason. And I just like the role that he's stepping into. The Cowboys, they like to target the tight end position. They target the position that 8th most last year. And historically, they've been fairly high as well, always above the mean. Luke Schoonmaker, who they took obviously in the 2nd round, is slowly working back from a foot injury. To me, it was a surprising pick. Not really a massive fan of Luke Schoonmaker. I do like Jake Ferguson. I like his value right now. I think you can probably still get him fairly cheap, but again, he got 3 targets in his first game with the starters from 3 targets, 3 receptions. I think if he carries on and he is the tight end one, the clear tight end one, if he hits game 1, then his value is certainly going to rise because he's in a pretty good offense where they've not got a lot of wide receivers, a lot of targets. So yeah, I think there's definitely a role for Jake Ferguson. Yeah, I think I'm a fan, but I'm cautious where his value might go if he does hit early on.
Yeah, so I thought Jake Ferguson's actually a little bit younger than Schoonmaker as well, which I was like a little bit surprised to find out. It's not by much, not anything really, really worth saying I'll take him over him because of that. I mean, I kind of looked into his stats. I was like, all right, he had about 3.5 receptions on average in college. That was pretty good. So I think he's. I like that you brought up the amount that the Cowboys target the tight end, because that is the situation that he's in here. That's really good. It could be anyone, and he seems to be like a fairly average tight end. But I mean, is it harsh to say so? Is Dalton Schultz, right? I mean, nothing too special. So if he ends up getting the targets, getting the work, he can end up with what, 50 receptions, couple of touchdowns, best case scenario. I mean, he could be in that tight end 10 to 30 mush, like you said, Lewis. So it's a bit of a, you may as well roll a dice if he's in there, because you don't know what position out of those that he's going to finish, right?
It's a safe space here, Mags, because Kev's not here, so we can slate Dalton Schultz all we want.
Yeah, I'm gonna say David Njoku sucks as well while he's away, right? How about that, Kev?
Get it in there quick. Jameer Gibbs, what a bust. Anyway,
it's a good test whether Kev listens back to the shows when he's not on.
Yeah,
we just have like a 5-minute rant about him at the end.
So yeah, love that section. We'll move on to your fantasy wildcard selection now, Lewis. So this is where we get our guest to pick their fantasy wildcard, the player that will improve their dynasty value the most in 2023. So basically, we're asking for a 2023 breakout performance. And as we're quite late on in the off season, there's quite a lot of players that you couldn't choose from. But I'm absolutely delighted for the guy that you have chosen. So over to you.
Yeah, I actually, this guy was actually my first pick, regardless of the list in front of me. I do want to point out that my pick last year was Jalen Hurts, who was a QB1 in points per game. So if we're going by example, that means that Brock Purdy is going to have a pretty good year. If I were to say to you, in every game this quarterback started, he scored at least 2 touchdowns. He threw for at least 2 touchdowns. He didn't finish with less than 15 points in a single game. And he's starting. We are now confirmed that he is starting for what, a top 5 offense in the NFL. What's not to love about Brock Purdy? Like, we know that he has a decent amount of mobility. We know that he can make some of the big time throws. We know that he has absolutely elite weapons in front of him, but also elite yak weapons. Like, all he has to do is dump the ball off to Christian McCaffrey and he can go 80 yards. Same with Deebo Samuel. Same with George Kittle. Same with Brandon Ayuk. Like, he has fantastic weapons in front of him. He's young. He looked really good last year. Again, he only started for 6 games in the regular season, and then a couple of playoffs where he looked fantastic until he then got injured in the NFC Championship game. He's currently going in. This is in redraft, but he's currently going as the QB 20. His ADP is still so low because I think he still has that like Mr. Irrelevant stink to him. And also, we're going. A few weeks ago, is Trey Lance still going to start? No, he's on the Cowboys now. Is Sam Darnold maybe going to start? No, he's really bad. Brock Purdy is the starter for one of the best offenses in football, and he's so cheap still. Like, I think you can probably get him for less than a first at the minute, which is absolutely insane. Those weapons in front of him, like we've seen Jimmy Garoppolo have some decent QB2 type fantasy seasons, just because of the players that are around him. There's absolutely a world in which Brock Purdy can outperform Jimmy Garoppolo. It's not saying a huge amount, is it? Like, and all he needs to do, he doesn't even need to be good himself. Like, all he has to do is be able to just dump the ball off to Deebo Samuel and CMC 20 times a game. But I think he is actually good as well. Like, I think he's actually a good quarterback. So I don't really see I can't really understand what I must be missing with Brock Purdy, because he's still going so cheap. Like, I got him as my QB3 in the Scott Fish Bowl in like the 11th round. And yeah, Trey Lance was still on the team, but Trey Lance was never going to start. Like, I don't see what I'm missing. I think he's really primed for a breakout this year.
Yeah, I think that's spot. I love like the meme that was going around, Twitter just not that long ago. It was like the 49ers have given Brock Purdy all the starting reps, and it's like Twitter. I don't know, it could still be Trey Lance. It's like Brock Purdy has got like confirmation from Kyle Shanahan. Twitter. I don't know, it could still be Trey Lance. It's like, what were people like? How were people ever thinking that it was going to be anyone else apart from Brock Purdy? Just listen to George Kittle talk about Brock Purdy and tell me that it was going to be anybody else. I mean, there's so much love for him in the dressing room. The only shame I think I have for you, Lewis, is that you weren't able to make this selection earlier when his ADP was even lower, because it has been slightly creeping up. So that's the only shame about this, because I think it's a brilliant pick.
Yeah, it's a fantastic pick. I am a massive, massive Brock Purdy fan. I mean, I was a big Trey Lance fan, but because of the facts that you've mentioned there, it's in a top 5, perhaps top 3 offense in the NFL with a great Kyle Shanahan, great offensive mind. Brock Purdy just has to be okay. Whereas Trey Lance, I like the situation, the draft capital. He just needed to be an okay quarterback. Turns out he wasn't a good not even an okay quarterback. Therefore, Brock Purdy came in and he's looked better than okay. He's looked above average, and the weapons are there. Yeah, quarterback 9 when he came in for the last 6 games last season, quarterback 11 in points per game. That just tells you all you need to know. Being drafted at quarterback 20. Yeah, I think if he has a solid season, and I think this time next season, which is where we'll be judging this, I think he could be quarterback 15 or higher, perhaps even a quarterback 12, like a late quarterback 1, because we saw the other night, he's coming back from that busted elbow, but he ran in that touchdown. He looked like he didn't have a care in the world. I really like that. I like his just ability. He's able to read the defenses, and he has that little bit of rushing as well to add to his game. So yeah, really like Brock Purdy. I think this is such a great pick. So with that brings us to the end of the show, where we've discussed camp and preseason hype, and the strategy to go with the players that we spoke about. So, yeah, before you go, please remind the audience where they can find you. And is there anything you'd like to plug, Lewis?
Yeah, absolutely. I am on Twitter or X. I heard you guys say X at the beginning. I'm still not adapted to that yet. I'm on X at LewisWoodFF_UK. And you can listen to me on the Fantasy Wildcard Rewind podcast as part of the Wildcard Network. So yeah, really delighted to be joining you boys as part of the network. Had a great time so far. You can find us over at the Wildcard Rewind show.
Absolutely loved having you on, Lewis, and I'm sure that we are going to be on many more times now that you're part of the family. So yeah, is there any final thoughts on tonight's show from you, Mags?
I absolutely loved it. It's nice to talk about these guys just before the season starts, because a lot of them, deserve a little bit of that shine. And, whenever everything kicks off, you kind of get caught up with all of the inevitable injuries to your favorite players and all of that. So it's nice to give these guys a bit of shine. So hopefully we helped out some Dynasty teams along the way there.
Yeah, and I think you are the perfect person to come on for this, because you are very, very level-headed. You didn't just pick a load of guys and say, you need to buy these players. I know if we'd have had Paul Picking come on, he would have just been pants down. You need to buy this guy. You need to buy that guy. We needed someone like you, Lewis, a smart guy, to come on and talk us through these players. So really enjoyed the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, cheers for having me, lads. Always a good time with you guys.
Love it. And thank you for tuning in. Be sure to follow us and subscribe on X or Twitter and YouTube at Fantasy Wildcard and at Wildcard Dynasty. And join us for our show every single Wednesday. So with that, thank you once again. Have a good one, and we'll see you again soon.